this week who's a new manager. And very often, when we go from being an independent contributor to being a new manager, it's sort of difficult to know where your job starts or where your job ends, or even like how you want to respond to different questions or different ways that you show up for presentations. And so I thought I would offer a framework that I use that helps me kind of know how to manage up, how to manage down when you're sort of a middle manager or a new manager, and then give an example of how it is also supportive for my client to use to kind of decide how to approach a presentation she was going to give that's coming up. So first, I think being a middle manager and a new manager is one of the most difficult jobs around because it's like that very first time that you go from just needing to manage yourself and maybe manage your relationship upward with your manager to sort of having to live your life as your head on a pivot, right? So now you manage up, which how you deal with like a director level, and you're also managing people underneath of you in addition to managing your work. So you go from being purely an individual contributor and doing things to also trying to get things done and working and interacting with people. And sometimes it's even more confusing of how that works or how that looks if you are a working manager, meaning you still have a fair amount of independent contributor work and you're also managing people or projects. And that's very common, especially in the fields that I've worked with or that I have a lot of clients in, either in very technical, very STEM related jobs and or um, just very precise work, right? I have some physicians that I work with. I have some software developers, product managers, all those types of folks. But when you go from doing really technical work to then also adding the people side, um, they didn't teach us in coding school, right, how to interact with other folks. So this first role as a manager can be a challenge. So I really look at it. I have a hair sticking out. Sorry, guys. I really look at it as what questions am I answering in that role? And so if you think about it, and that's sort of this framework that I like to work on that helps me answer other questions. So the independent contributor role, or like if you're a developer or a scientist or a physician or a doctor, and all of the work, physicist, right, those things, the work that is done is when you're answering how questions. How do I run this experiment? How do I code better? How do I do source control? How do I do an experiment, which I already said. So a lot of the questions are about how. And so, like when you're doing a presentation and you're presenting your technical work to another level, a level above you, you are usually just talking about how you ran an experiment, how you put together the software, how you did the architecture. And so that's sort of that first level of if I'm an independent contributor, a lot of the things that I'm doing is really answering how. If you're a manager, right, especially a first time manager, you start answering more questions like what. So instead of saying, how do I run an experiment? You're answering the question, what experiments am I running? Or how do I code and do code review or up this process? You're saying, what processes do we need as it relates to code review, as it relates to these other things? And so a lot of the things that we're doing in that role and the new role is what, like answering what questions. And I like that distinction because it helps sometimes let us know if maybe we're micromanaging or if we're way too hands off. And so one easy way to know if you're micromanaging is if you're still doing a lot of how type work or you're doing a lot of how type questions. So if you're still going to your people and going, why are you doing it that way? You should be doing it this way. This is how you should be doing it. And versus coming to your team and saying, this is what we need to get done. How do you suggest we go about that? Right. So that's kind of that first step. And then I find above that, if you're looking at director or SVP or like the ones above, and the higher and higher you go, you're kind of answering like more why questions. So if you think about it in sort of a product management role, at the director level, you're answering questions to the stakeholders in the C-suite of why did we choose this product over this product? So if you had a choice between an analog clock product and a digital clock product, If you're answering these questions on maybe a product roadmap or a design review meeting, you're answering why, right? The why would be things like the return on investment. The why would be things like it was a major request from our customers. It was a major client question. So the why questions are the ones that you're answering the higher you go up. And so if you're doing a presentation, it was very likely that you're answering why did we prioritize this over that? Why did we decide to pick these OKRs? Why does this meet our mission, vision, and values? So that's what that kind of next level is. And I found this really, really helpful in terms of kind of saying the why, the what, and the how in terms of roles when answering a lot of really specific inquiries or questions that people had. So this particular client that I talked about yesterday, she's a chemist, right? So she's does a lot of experiments, a lot of drug-related experiments, and in her 90% of her role until recently has been to go in, run an experiment, get a result, and that's what she's done. And someone above her told her what she was going to be experimenting on. She decided how she was going to do that. She decided what she was going to report on, and her presentations were really more about methodology. Like, this is how I did this. This is how I got this process. Um, and that worked for her. It was fine. Well, very recently she's promoted to project lead, right? So now she has a project to manage as well as other people and other scientists and other chemists. And she has a big presentation coming up, and she was a little bit nervous. And she said, well, it's her first time representing a project, right? A whole group of things versus representing how she was doing a specific thing. And so that's when we talked about the why, the what, and the how. So my offer to her, and of course this is very generalizing and use it the way it works or doesn't work for you as you go forward. But we talked about it and I said, well, who are you presenting to now, right? So now she's presenting to other managers. I said, okay, so if you're presenting to other managers and you're presenting to directors, or so is a larger meeting, so our stakeholders have gone up in the levels, what questions are they going to want answers to? And she's like, well, they don't really care how I perform the experiment, nor do they probably even, some of them even get it. And I was like, okay, that's fair. So what do they want to know? And she's like, well, they probably want to know what was the outcome? What does it mean for us? What can we do with it? Right? All of those types of things. And I was like, exactly. So as we approach different situations now, as now a leader versus being an individual contributor, not only are we asking the what questions, but those are the questions that our peers are asking, and that's what they're interested in knowing about. So the way that you might present something, or the way that you might show up in a meeting as you're representing an area, is you may start now going like coming out of the weeds a little bit and starting to talk more about what are the implications of the thing you did versus how did you perform in the thing that you did. So hopefully you find that helpful. I know my client and several others that I've talked to in the past have found it a bit supportive just to have a way of looking at that. If you have any questions or you would like some additional thoughts on that, feel free to reach out. And thanks so much for your time today.